Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we are joining this webinar. I want to pay my respects especially to the strong leadership of First Nations women in carrying the hopes and dreams of their communities and keeping the faith that one day we will get to live in a just country where all elders are respected. It gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you to this International Women's Day webinar. Those of you who followed the Older Women's Network and Celebrate Aging will know that we've been collaborating over the past few years on a campaign called Older Women Count in the lead up to International Women's Day. So this afternoon, you hear from Dr. Katherine Barrett, Deborah Nicholl, the CEO of Elder Rights Advocacy in Victoria, Sarah Codling from Whitehorse Council, and our main speaker, Jane Gilmore, followed by a brief reflection by Beverly Baker, the national president of the Older Women's Network. We want to dismantle ageism, not just sexism. And to tell you more about our project, Older Women Count, and the motivation behind it, I'd like to welcome Dr. Katherine Barrett. Dr. Katherine Barrett is the founder of Celebrate Ageing, and she was inducted as a trailblazer in the Victorian Honour Roll and founded a Facebook page called Kindness Pandemic, which won the Facebook Award for being the most uplifting Facebook group in the world. So welcome, Katherine.
Thanks, Yumi. My name's Katherine Barrett, and I'm the director of Celebrate Ageing, which is a charity combating ageism and building respect for older people. We've been doing this work for over a decade. For the past 3 years, we've collaborated on the Older Women Count campaign with the Older Women's Network of New South Wales and with Suzanne Phoenix. What we want to do with this campaign is to raise awareness around International Women's Day of the contributions and achievements of older women. We want International Women's Day to be inclusive. But over time, over the past 3 years, our aims have really evolved quite a bit. And what we really strongly believe is that older women need to be seen and valued every single day of the year, in every family, in every community, every service, every event, and every policy. Our approach each year has been to focus on the contributions and achievements of older women. But what we've also realised is that so many people do not see the disrespect, the ageism and sexism that older women face. And so what we wanted to do this year was to hold up a mirror to society and say, look at the ways that older women are represented in popular culture. We feel we need to do this to show people the urgency of the need to build respect for older women. Most people don't see it. So that's a new aspect of our campaign. And then there's a photographic component of it as well. So this is an incredibly important campaign. We believe that it's currently the only campaign that is raising awareness of the inequity for older women. And we are really pleased this year that we are being supported by Elder Rights Advocacy and the Whitehorse City Council. So I would like to hand over to Deborah Nicholl, the CEO of Elder Rights Advocacy, to say a few words, and Sarah Codling as well, who's the Positive Ageing Officer from Whitehorse City Council, because this would not be possible at all without their support, and also the Older Women's Network in particular, and Jane. We are just feeling incredibly hopeful today that this is part of a process of change beyond the morning teas, which I think are incredibly important on International Women's Day, but we need change, and we don't need it in 10 years' time or 5 years. We need change, and we need it now. So thank you, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Katherine. It is my great pleasure to be able to join you all here today, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. So a little bit about Elder Rights Advocacy. We are the Victorian member of the Older Persons Advocacy Network, or OPAN, but we were founded over 30 years ago by a group of older women who recognised that when they stopped working, when they went grey, when they had wrinkles on their face, they weren't respected, acknowledged, or appreciated to the extent that they had been through their working life. And I'd just like to very quickly read to you the statement of purpose when they established what was then called the Older Persons Action Centre. It was to foster within ourselves and our contemporaries and the wider community a positive view of being older, to recognise and utilise the wealth of experience and skills accumulated by older people, to uphold the rights of older people, and to provide a network of support for older people to speak up on their own behalf and take action on issues which concern us. It is on the shoulders of those women that we stand today, and certainly at Elder Rights Advocacy we continue to promote the rights of older people and advocate for them to receive, in particular, the aged care services to which they are entitled. So we have two programs at Elder Rights Advocacy. One is the National Aged Care Advocacy Program, and that is where we provide information and advocacy support to older Victorians. We are funded by the Commonwealth Government, but we do not work for them. We work for older people and we work for our board, and I answer to them. Not to the government. It is important to us that we hear and represent the voice of older people and, of course, older women. That is dear to my heart. When I saw the Cougars, Grannies and Old Bags, I thought, oh, Cougars, large cat native to the Americas, Grannies or nanny, I am one, and Old Bags, very handy, useful things, particularly as we are moving away from plastic. I know that's not the context in which those terms are often used, but that's the narrative that, of course, we want to change. One of the other things that or other programs, I should say, that we have here at Elder Rights Advocacy is the Aged Care Volunteer Visitors Scheme. And that's where we have volunteers across the whole state of Victoria who we match up with isolated older people. The reason that's so important is, of course, for the social connection, but also because we know that people who are isolated and feeling lonely are more vulnerable to elder abuse. So it is a really important primary prevention measure when we're tackling abuse of older people. So please reach out if anybody listening would like to volunteer for that program, because it is a very important and vital service that we provide to older people. The staff at Elder Rights Advocacy work across the whole state. They live and work in community. Again, that's important because it's what older people have said they would like us to do, to be living, working in community and understanding what the local issues are, particularly for regional Victorians. So why are we supporting this campaign? Because ageist attitudes, both our own internal and out in the community, affect the health and well-being of older women. They contribute to the devaluing of older women and the prevalence of elder abuse. The inequalities that older women experience, the list is the same. It has not changed, and that is quite shocking. They are the lowest income earning members of the family group, the largest group of unpaid carers. 70% of carers are women, and we know that carers have the poorest health and well-being of any cohort measured in this country. They're the fastest growing group of homeless people. Just Friday, we had a call from an older woman who had discharged herself from hospital, and she was calling us from her local McDonald's because that was where she plugged her mobile phone in. She was living in her car. It's not good enough. Older women are more likely to live in poverty. 34% of single older women live in poverty. They're more likely to experience workplace discrimination. That is, if they're fortunate enough after the age of about 50, 55 to have a job. And of course, they are more likely to be among the estimated 50 people experiencing sexual abuse in residential aged care, for example, each week in this country. I'm a daughter, a sister, a mother, a grandmother to a daughter and a 7-year-old granddaughter. I want her to grow up in a world where she is seen and valued all of her life. Over Christmas, we had some people visit, family members visit. I've got one granddaughter, 3 grandsons. When they met my granddaughter, and they hadn't seen her since she was a baby, they said, "Oh, you've grown into a pretty young thing." When they met my grandsons, they said, "Oh, you look strong, you're clever." We have to stop. I check myself to stop those sorts of things that I've heard all through my 60-odd years of life. I'm doing this, of course, for older women, but I'm doing it for her and her generation. This work is important, and we do need to change our view and our narrative around young girls all the way through to older women. So those of us who work with older people need to take a gender lens to our work. Those who work in gender inequalities need to take a lifespan approach. And for everyone else, building cultures where older women are valued and respected is everyone's responsibility. So thank you for the time and for listening to me. And now over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Deborah. And thank you, Katherine and Yumi also. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Codling, and I work at Whitehorse City Council in the Positive Ageing team. Whitehorse is a local government area in the eastern region of Melbourne, Victoria. The Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation are the traditional owners of the land on which I live and work, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We're very excited to be partnering on the Older Women Count campaign this year. Whitehorse City Council has a strong commitment to challenging ageism and promoting gender equity in our community, along with many valued partners in the eastern region of Melbourne. Partnering on the Older Women Count campaign is a fantastic opportunity to raise wider awareness of how ageist and sexist stereotypes of older women contribute to inequality. We've started the Citizen Researcher Initiative by hosting an initial session with Whitehorse staff and key local partners, including our local legal service, women's health service, and library service. And this has already produced important conversations and questions about how older women are depicted in our culture. For me, as well as noting that images of older women are generally not positive, I've also noticed the complete absence of images of older women of any type in certain settings. On a recent walk around a large shopping centre with my 11-year-old daughter, we didn't see one image of an older woman anywhere. At Whitehorse, we'll continue to roll out the Citizen Researcher Initiative in our community. We've asked our local partners to take the concept back to their organisations, and we've put a call out to community members to join in. Through this initiative, we will continue to raise wider awareness of how ageist and sexist stereotypes of older women contribute to inequality. As a counterpoint to the negative images of older women that the Citizen Research Initiative is identifying, we are thrilled to have the opportunity to participate in the Biscuit Tin photographic portrait series. This series will capture positive images of older women in our local community, celebrate their achievements, and share their messages about respect. Beverly Baker will share some examples of these portraits later in the webinar, and I had the opportunity to have a sneak peek earlier, which made me feel even more excited about being able to do this work in the Whitehorse community. Thank you for your time, everyone, and I encourage you to get involved in this important campaign in whatever way you can.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jane Gilmore. Some of you may not know of Jane Gilmore, but you will probably be very familiar with the media headlines which have been crossed out with red lines and rewritten. She started this campaign called Fixed It in 2014, and her collection of the horrendous headlines and reflection on them were collated and published by Penguin Random House in 2019. Jane is an award-winning journalist, feminist, and consent educator. She's been researching and writing about the causes and effects of violence and poverty for many years now. And I urge you all to buy her books. Her latest has a very profound title, Fairy Tale Princesses Will Kill Your Children. Jane will now share her perspectives on why cougars, grannies, and old bags are so commonly used to describe older women and the impact this has.
Thank you so much, Yumi, Deborah, Sarah, and Katherine. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I just want to echo what Yumi said about acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. And because it's International Women's Day, I want to make a particular point about that. Words are not enough. Words, when actions don't match them, is a PR strategy. So we don't just acknowledge, and I'm not saying that anyone here is just doing that kind of thing. I'm saying that we all need to make a better effort. I need to make a better effort to do more than just words. So one of the things that I've been doing is on my phone, I have open on the browser all the time the Aboriginal Legal Service, and every time I hear an acknowledgement, I try and make a donation. If I don't have the money to do that, I will find a First Nations poet or artist or writer that I've never heard of before. I will read an article written by a First Nations person that I haven't read before, make an effort to actually do something, not just say the words and then go, yay me, I've said the right words, and move on to the thing that's actually important. The reason I say that's important on International Women's Day, and we were talking about this before the webinar started, I used to do 10 to 12 events on International Women's Day. It was the busiest day of my year, frantically busy, and too many of them were turning up to be cover for somebody who was not actually doing anything, or an organisation that was doing, not just doing nothing, actively working against women in their organisation by underpaying them, undervaluing them, ignoring them, dismissing them, talking over them, and then asking me to turn up and make them look good. And so I have absolutely refused to do that from now on. This, I was saying before, this is the quietest International Women's Day that I've had in a decade. It's great, because the feeling that I get now is I chose 2 events, this one and one at a library later on tonight, where I believe it matters, where I believe the people that asked me to turn up because they're actually working for change. They are doing something. They're not just talking about it. So one of the things that I want to start off with is talking about the myths that underpin ageism and sexism and the link between the two of them. Because when we talk about these particular aspects, whether it's ageism or homophobia or racism or ableism, sexism, all of the isms, we talk about them like they're all separate issues. Or when we talk about intersectionality, we say, well, you experience sexism and you experience racism, or you experience ageism and you experience ableism, without understanding how connected they are. That it's ageist sexism that older women experience. That it's not just sexism the way, say, a 25-year-old woman would experience it, because a 25-year-old woman absolutely does. Older women experience a different kind of sexism directed at their age. And all of these things depend on each other. So when young women will talk to me and be dismissive of events like this, oh, that doesn't apply to me, that's not relevant to me. And I think, I get it, because I remember thinking that when I was that age, but you need to understand that the fact that you can be dismissed because you're a young woman depends on being able to dismiss older women because they're old. Because I think there's about half an hour, maybe when you're 28, where you're the right age, when you're a woman. Otherwise, you're either too young to matter or too old to count. And those things depend on each other. Younger women are for being decorative, for being sexual, desirable. That makes them interesting and worthwhile. When you lose that, that's part of the reason that older women become invisible. You don't have that anymore, so what is the point of you? Those things depend on each other. So absolutely, younger women are completely impacted by ageism. It's just a different kind of ageism, and it has a different expression, that young women are silly and vain and frivolous. That's sexism and ageism. Old women are invisible and useless and pointless. Ageism and sexism, they all depend on each other. So when we look at why those myths exist, one of the things that I did recently, Yumi was kindly talking about my Fairy Tale Princesses Will Kill Your Children book, which was so much fun to write. But I started looking at the fairy tales that I grew up with, that my mother grew up with, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and really looked closely at what those fairy tales were telling children, and thinking at the time when I first started this project that, oh, this doesn't matter as much anymore because kids have got, you know, the new Disney movies now, they're not watching these old ones. Turns out I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a whole lot of things that I thought when I started this project. But when you look at those myths, say, take Snow White and Beauty and the Beast, the history of those fairy tales doesn't just go back a couple of generations, it goes back hundreds of generations and thousands of years. As far as I can tell, Beauty and the Beast, there are versions of it in almost every culture in the world. The story remains exactly the same. And the history of it goes back, as far as I can find, to almost every recorded history. There is some version of the Beauty and the Beast story where the handsome prince, a bit entitled, bit of a, you know, rich white boy, is cursed by an old woman, because all the villains in fairy tales are old women. He turns into a monster. A beautiful young girl is put in his path, and it is her job to turn him from a monster into the handsome prince. And she does this by being unselfish. The more unselfish she is, the better chance she has of turning the monster into the handsome prince. If she's not unselfish enough, he remains the monster, and that's her fault. The underlying myth of all of this is, I mean, it's coercive control. That's what it's designed to explain. And we miss the point the whole way. When you talk about these things, we often miss the point that he was cursed by the older woman to be the monster. He's not responsible for being the monster. He's not making a choice to be controlling and aggressive and violent and frightening. He was cursed to be this way by the most dangerous creature in the world, which is an older woman. Snow White, even though the supposedly beautiful queen was the villain, she took on the guise of the old crone to become the real threat. Because again, the most dangerous creature in the world to anybody is older women. None of the fairy tale princesses have a good relationship with an older woman. All of their mothers died when they're babies, because why would you want a mother in a fairy tale, right? Their stories end as soon as their babies are born. None of the fairy tale princesses have positive older women role models. And we all know from our own experiences and the experiences of other women around us that there is nothing more important in your life than those older women. There was some research done during COVID looking at depression levels in adolescents, and it found one of the key protective factors in protecting against depression during the pandemic was a close relationship with a grandmother. It was specifically a grandmother, it wasn't a grandfather, it was specifically a grandmother. And one of the things they found that did so much harm during the pandemic was the number of grandmothers who died and the profound effect that had on younger people, because particularly girls, but all younger people, because we know that those older women are the strongest protective factors in young women's lives. But if you listen to fairy tales, old women are dangerous. The reasons for this are complex, but underpin patriarchy. Older women tend to be more powerful, just in their ability to ignore the rules that tell them how they're supposed to behave, to recognize how foolish they are. We know more. We have wisdom, we have experience, we have the ability to explain what we've learned, and we have the ability to care for younger women. And we make the choice to do so. This, of course, becomes a threat to men who are trying to control younger women. So it all circles back together. What they're trying to do in that is make it for younger women, other women are the enemy and the most dangerous threat of all older women. So then we get the witch, the crone, the stereotype of the villainous older woman. If we had more time, I could spend the whole hour just talking about the history of witches and where the myths came from, and the tens of thousands of women who were killed for knowing things, for having medical knowledge, for having knowledge about childbirth and reproduction, for daring to question men who were being just ridiculous and needed questioning. Easiest solution to that during the witch burning era was, you're a witch, off to the stake with you. There's another interesting hour that I could spend talking about when we stopped burning witches and started using science to prove that women are just less intelligent men, smaller and less intelligent men. That happened within about 100 years of each other. And the ongoing evidence that wonderful male scientists have provided about how women are just silly and meant to raise babies. All of these things are connected. All of these things we like to think are relegated to the past, until you start looking at the evidence of what is happening right now today in Australia. So I'm sure a lot of you would have heard about the gender pay gap data, company specific, that came out. Another hour for my issues with the gender pay gap data. But if you take the tax office data, which I did last year, I think it was from the year before, because there's always a delay in releasing the data, and you have a look at how much money, and I'm going to emphasize here, is paid, not earned, but paid to men and to women in Australia. And the tax office data can be broken down into very, very distinct chunks. And you look at the difference between how much men in their 50s are paid in 2 years ago in Australia and how much women in their 50s are paid. Men in their 50s are paid more than twice, 50-something 5% of what women in their 50s are paid. The reason I say pay, not earn, is because I do not believe they are earning twice as much as women of their own age. That is just how much they're paid. This links back to those myths that I was talking about before. Women are either too young to matter or too old to count. When you're younger, you should be having babies. You should be getting married. You should be thinking about how you look. You should be getting a haircut and wearing some makeup and high heels and a skirt. And why are you turning up to work looking like that? Then you get old, you should be looking after your husband, your children, your grandchildren. We don't want to promote you. We don't want to have a woman with grey hair and wrinkles on her face on the CEO photo of our brochure. We need a powerful figure, and a powerful figure is a man with grey hair. It is not powerful to be a woman with grey hair. All of these things are connected. What we were talking about, I think a number of women have already mentioned this, about the older women in poverty, is absolutely related to all of this, and it doesn't start when you get to your 50s. It starts when you're 3. I do a lot of work doing consent education, and the organisation I work with starts in kindergarten and goes right through to year 12, and I also do work in universities. And at every stage along the way, you can see, starting with the 3-year-olds, of the boys that will say, "Why are you playing with a truck? That's for boys. Snatch." Out of the sandpit. And with the best of intentions, with care and love, the educators will come and pick up the little girl and soothe her because she's crying and hug her better and think that that's solving the situation, till you get to school when the responsible, capable girls are sat down next to the naughty boy so that she can manage him, so she can manage his behaviour. To high school, where the children, the young people there, are starting to experience and commit against each other sexual assault, and the girls all know about it and are told to manage it themselves, to sit in a classroom next to their perpetrator and manage that themselves, because, well, we can't threaten his career. We can't, he's only just starting out. We can't go to the police, and we can't believe him. We can't believe you against him. You deal with it. All the way along till you get to university, and the girls are there so full of energy and optimism and life. And I look at them and think, you are going to be some of the most educated young women in the world, and you will still not be paid as well as the boys sitting next to you. You will not last as long in your profession as the boys sitting next to you, because your contribution will not be valued as much. And by the time you are at that point where somebody like me is comparing tax data of women in their 50s, you will be one of those people being paid half as much. You'll be one of those people thinking that if I leave this, even just unhappy, but possibly abusive marriage, where will I go? What will I do? One of the other organisations that I have done a lot of work with does crisis response for domestic violence victims. And it has always been a choice between poverty and violence. It is a pick your crisis. It is now a choice between violence and homelessness. And we saw this over and over and over again, and there is no solution. I would love to be able to say that all those frontline organisations were able to find somewhere, in most cases, maybe for a night, maybe 2, maybe 3, but a long-term solution doesn't exist. Because nationally, across the entire country, is complicity in the idea that older women don't matter. We cannot make them the kind of campaign that Chanel Contos did with consent education for young women. And as a consent educator who deals frequently with young women, I am not at all disparaging that work. It's important, good work. But I'm trying to imagine what would happen if we started trying to raise the equivalent level of national engagement with a campaign for older women. I don't know of anyone who's ever done it. I know of a lot of people who have tried, but it doesn't work. You don't get the same kind of engagement that Chanel was able to get. And again, not at all dismissing how important it was that Chanel got that recognition. That was really, really important that she got it. What I'm saying is that we have room for more than one idea. I can recognize the importance of Chanel's contribution and also say, why can't we have a woman in her 60s talking about that and getting that same level of contribution? But as far as I can tell, there is only room for, I think, one woman in public debate, older woman in public debate in Australia, and Jane Kerr's already got that job, and I love Jane, she's a good friend of mine, but there is probably room for more than her voice. It doesn't seem to be the case. It doesn't seem to be that other women can be part of that space, that we can make the space a bit bigger. Not that we get rid of Jane, but that we make the space a bit bigger and put other women with other perspectives in there. Because it is so incredibly difficult to get people to see past that myth of, but you're old now. And look, I like on International Women's Day to be able to have some optimism, to come at a strength-based approach and be able to say, instead of sitting here going, everything's terrible, the sky is falling, and say there's hope. And I wish I could find a way to say that. I think the fact that we have events like this, the fact that we have organisations like the organisations represented here and the work that they're doing is a sign to be hopeful, but it takes more. It takes a real engagement from everybody, not just from older women and the people that they drag along to the events. It takes understanding that this matters, because it matters to everybody. Because older women just have inherent value, not what they do for other people, not what they do for their families, not the fact that they matter to their granddaughters, that they have intrinsic value on their own. That the work that we do to care for older women, or to give them the power to care for themselves, just that on its own is important. Add to that the economic value that older women can bring, the emotional value, as I said, the protective factor for adolescent people of all genders, but particularly adolescent girls. There is enormous untapped economic and social value in older women. And a lot of the work that we contribute at the moment is either undervalued or not valued at all. And I think it's sometimes something that we can use to say to government, hey, this is worth investing some time and effort in. But I would rather say to the people that we need to get involved, this is your issue too, because these people matter. Not because the individuals that matter to you, but because all these things are linked. If you are going to be an activist against the kind of sexism that is levelled at young women, you have to equally be an activist against the kind of sexism that is levelled at older women, because they are flip sides of the same coin. The violence that men enact against younger women has particular motives that, again, another hour, we need about 3 days, I think, for me to cover all of the things properly. But the violence that's enacted against older women has a particularly insidious nature to it, in that all men's violence against women is about power. When it's enacted against older women, there is often an understanding that no one's going to care, that no one's going to believe her, that older women are crazy, senile, unreliable, unimportant. So even if she does tell somebody, they won't believe her. Even if she does try and get help, it won't be there. So what a common trend in that kind of violence is an awareness by the perpetrator of that. Neither of those people started out old. They started young, and those attitudes that enabled that violence and that dependence on the fact that this older woman who's still being abused after 40 years now has nowhere to go is learned along the way. It's not like people wake up at 60 and go, oh, hang on, I've just suddenly worked this out. Like I said, they start learning that value at 3. So by the time that this kind of men who enact that kind of violence get to 50 or 60, they know that nobody is going to hold them to account because they spent the last 50 years learning that. So if we're talking about prevention, it's about the 50 years before they're abusing an older woman that we need to be looking at. When we're talking about the services for her, absolutely, which she needs to be able to call somebody who will believe her, somebody who will listen to her, and somebody who will be able to help her. Without a doubt, and that is not happening. And that needs government funding. It needs huge amount of understanding, greater understanding in the general community about how it happens, why it continues to happen, and why nobody listens. There's a lot of work to be done there. And the things I think that are the most effective in doing that work is events like this, is people going away from events like this and having those conversations. The old meaning of grassroots change, which is genuine change at that grassroots level, at what people know and understand and what they talk about. And that then has to change, as I said, not just words, but behaviour, that then has to change how we behave. One really small thing is challenging people to, when you go to the shops, I was at the market the other day, standing at the cheese shop. There was me and another older woman. She had a mobility aid and very white hair, and a young guy in his late 20s, early 30s, just walked straight past both of us, stood in front of both of us, waiting to be the next one served. I don't think he even saw us. Now, it wasn't violence. It wasn't putting either of us in poverty. It was mildly annoying. And the young woman behind the counter also didn't see us and served him next. And I was telling a friend of mine about this, and her son was listening. And he said, well, what should he have done? I said, it's about noticing when you walk up to the counter, who else is here? Am I seeing that woman in her 80s? Am I seeing that woman in her 50s? Or am I just going, oh, not important, I'll walk past them? Because the ideas that we don't know we have are the ones that are the most dangerous. Yumi was talking before about Fixed It. That's the book I wrote about Fixed It. So that's the basic concept, is the headline, cross it out and rewrite it. The reaction I get most commonly to Fixed It is, oh, I had never noticed that before, but now that you've pointed it out, I see it everywhere. You know, like if you buy a particular brand of car, suddenly everybody's driving that car. If you're pregnant, suddenly everybody's pregnant. When you start seeing those things, suddenly you see it everywhere. But until then, it has still been everywhere. You just haven't seen it. We just don't notice the things that we don't know we're not noticing. So having that awareness, just that, notice it, have a look around, think about it, because you're not noticing it because you're not thinking about it. Setting those challenges can be confronting because, like anything to do with women, too often the reaction is, you're calling me sexist. I'm not sexist. Not all men, not all young people. And I get it. I've done that about when I was a journalist, and I had people like during COVID when journalism was not at its finest, and I was having but not all journalists' reaction. So I get it. But it's about persisting in those conversations, about reminding people what to look for, about reminding them what they don't see, and then having conversations with other people about it. It's profound how much that can change. It sounds so simple, but it's actually not. It actually can be a really huge marker of change. And the reason that I know that is because I've watched it happen with Fixed It, which I started eight years ago, I think. And in that 8 years, I have seen absolutely change in the way the media is reporting violence against women. Now, that's not only because of me and Fixed It by any means. There's a lot of other people doing a lot of other work, but all those things come together. And the thing that women throughout the last, well, certainly the last 200 years, but actually for most of history, the thing that women have always been able to do really, really well is work together to change things. And particularly if you look at the last 200 years, the amount of change, positive change in the world has been, so much of it has been driven by women. Not always getting it right, not always doing it well, 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes down the wrong path. All of those things are true. But if you look at where we were 200 years ago, when women were property, when children belonged to fathers, when women couldn't vote, when there was no state care for age, for single mothers, for anyone, most of that change has been driven by women. And I absolutely can promise you that the things that have changed for women did not change because a bunch of benevolent men went, here, would you like the vote? Would you like equal pay? Would you like some legislation against sexual harassment? You just sit there and have a cup of tea, we'll do it for you. Absolutely not. Women went out and fought for it. They went to jail for it. Some women died for it, but it worked. And it's what people often have asked me over the years, how I hold on to hope. And it's not always easy. I do a lot of work in courts directly with victim survivors of sexual violence and domestic violence. Now, working in prevention of child sexual abuse, there are some absolute horror stories, and it is really, really hard to maintain hope sometimes because it feels so relentless. It feels like we're not getting anywhere. It's just banging your head against the same wall over and over again. And the only thing that's happening is I'm getting a headache and the wall hasn't changed. And when you think in those short term, in a year and a couple of months, even a couple of years, that's what it looks like. The thing I always use to remind myself is my mother, who can remember having milk delivered to her house by a horse and cart. She came over to my place for dinner last weekend and she got here with a smartphone. That's how much things changed in a single lifetime. When she got married, the marriage bar had only just been lifted, which, in case anybody doesn't know, was the law that said that women in the public service had to resign as soon as they got married because they were holding a spot that could be taken by a far more valuable man, and they should be at home looking after the husband and children anyway. Rape in marriage was still legal. The term domestic violence had never been heard of. The Equal Pay Act was still in the process of being put into place, but certainly wasn't enforced. And like I said, the change in her lifetime, the change that my daughter experiences. My daughter's at uni at the moment, and like her, when I was at uni, I used to work in hospitality. She brings home similar stories about the customers who will sometimes, after a few drinks, go, oh, look, a pretty young barmaid. There's a fun thing. In my day, that was part of the job. Deal with it and don't complain about it or you lose your job. In her day, she's got a bar manager keeping an eye on all the customers and all of the staff. Doesn't prevent the problem entirely. Like I said, she still comes home with stories, but the difference in attitude is there. Change is about the long term. We're talking about the way people think, those fundamental fairy tales that they grow up with, the ideas that they started to learn when they were 3. And particularly when we're talking about older people, we assume that they can't learn. Your old dog can't learn new tricks. I'm here to tell you, the oldest of us absolutely can learn new tricks, but some of those ideas that we don't know we have become very deeply embedded. So it does take a little bit of extra work to dig them out. Having said that, I'd also have to say some of the 5-year-olds I've been dealing with can have some really thoroughly entrenched ideas that they just will not give up. So it's about willingness to give up your ideas, willingness to think, to talk, to listen. People of all ages have that. That is our opportunity to change, and remembering that my mother's in her 70s now, so in the last 70 years, we have done that. It worked. Women set out to make those changes and did. We're not all the way there yet by any means, but I tell you what, I haven't given up yet. And I know there's a whole lot of other people who haven't either. So I have hope for the future. It's just about taking that longer term look. I believe that when my daughter is my mother's age, that her life will be different. For a woman in her 70s then will be different than what it will be when I'm in my 70s and what it is now for my mother in her 70s. What my grandmother thought, you know, you look at these generations of women, these amazing women throughout my family, and think, these are the changes that happened. My grandmother could not imagine a life outside being an old woman and a grandmother, because that was all she was ever allowed to be. She was allowed to be a wife, she was allowed to be a mother, and then she was allowed to be a grandmother, and that was it. She had no other options. She wanted them. She didn't even know how to go about them. My mother had options and took them, but felt guilty about it. I had options and took it and didn't feel quite so guilty, but also had a wider range of options. And Bella, my daughter, won't play with guilt at all. I am going to look at all my options. I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to try things. I'm going to go and try something else, because that is the life that I have. So I guess what I'm, just to sum up, because I know it's almost time for me to finish, the two things that are linked, like I said, we're talking about linkages the whole way through this. The two things that are linked is holding on to that hope by understanding that change is a long game, and understanding that we have power, that we don't ever have to feel helpless or powerless in the face of what looks like overwhelming force, because small changes are what does it. And we can make those small changes. We can all make those, just those tiny little changes. Long-term thorough change, the kind of change that my daughter is now celebrating, is an accumulation of a whole lot of small moments. And we can all do those small moments. And maintain some of that anger. I know it's bad for women to be angry. I know we're not supposed to, but I think we have cause. I know we have cause. Maintaining that anger does fuel us to keep going. Maintaining that anger at the way older women are treated, at the way middle-aged women are treated, at the way younger women are treated, at the way girls are treated, the way little babies are treated. Maintain that anger, because it works, because it helps keep us fueled, because it's healthy and right and righteous, and not something to be afraid of or ashamed of. I think all of these things are an act of revolution. To care about older women and say so is an act of revolution, because it is not the thing that we are supposed to do. To be angry and rightfully, unapologetically, desk-poundingly angry is an act of revolution, and it's powerful and it can make change, even if that is your example. Maybe that's enough for now, for today. I would like to be able to wave a magic wand over the whole world and fix it all. Sadly, I tried, it didn't work. So I'm going to keep going with my small, what I can do today for now. And I'm going to stay angry. I am going to be, in fact, the scariest thing in the world. I am going to be an angry aging feminist and love it. If anyone's got any questions, I would be thrilled to answer them if we've got time. But if not, I'm going to hand back to Yumi, I think, or to Beverly. I'm going to hand back to somebody who knows what's happening next. And I'll be here for the rest of the session if we have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Jane. Words fail me, which is, anyone who knows me knows that that's highly unusual. Look, I can't thank all of our guests enough today, but my job is to sum up what we have been exposed to and what we've learned. And Katherine told us about the importance of being counted, of being recognised, of being part of the discussion. Deborah talked about the incredible amount of work that women are doing. She talked about the impact of the work that they do, and she talked about the need for us to celebrate that and recognise it. Sarah talked about the issues that she was facing at a council level and working around making sure that women were not only seen, but that they were heard, and having nothing in her community which recognised the value, the worth and the beauty of older women, because their posters and photos of them weren't on display anywhere. They were invisible as far as any recognition or any reflection of a community goes. And Jane, you absolutely unpicked the sticky web that we weave around women that entrap them. The whole nest and network of compliance, quietness, subservience, caring, patience, generosity that is then used to bind us. So if we dare to look elsewhere, dare to question, dare to want more, it means that we are failure. And what you actually did was you exposed the absolute importance of one generation talking to the other. The only thing my father ever said to me that I actually had any value, and I'm not close to my father, was that when he was 90, he looked at me in my 60s and he said, I can remember what it was like to be your age. You have no idea what it's like to be mine. That has become my catch cry. I did not appear at this age. I grew to this age. And like you, when I was 20, 30, 40, 50, didn't think that being over 70 was really anything I needed to worry about. I now look back and realise how important it was that at 20, I recognised that this was happening to older women, that we were marginalising them. And I now believe that the banner for all of us, the baton for all of us to pick up, is to talk intergenerationally, talk about the commonalities. The fact that younger women are sexually abused and older women are sexually abused, it's the same thing. It's driven by the same thing, power and entitlement. And when you actually realise, as Deborah would realise, there are 50 older women a week being sexually abused in aged care facilities, one has to ask, where are those people doing that abusing coming from? Were they the people that were abusing children, have now been exposed and like cockroaches with a light put on them, have gone after some other disempowered, weak people who they know no one will believe? These are the conversations that we must have, because the only way we are going to do this is together. The only way we are going to make a difference is by calling it out. And I can't thank you all enough for doing precisely that. I would like now to turn it back over to my CEO, Yumi, to finalise this and round it up. Thank you again all so very much.
Thank you, Beverly. We'd really like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. We've got, obviously you've seen we've got some way to go to dismantle ageism and sexism, but the journey has well and truly begun. So as one of the younger women who is in this webinar has asked, what can I do to help in doing the dismantling? And I think one of the things that can be done is to share our Biscuit Tin campaign. And this is the world premiere, and I hope the technology will work for this. And I would like to share with you 3 images that were taken, and you will recognize some of them. I hope you can see the slides, and I will start the slideshow from the beginning. So what we are going to do is actually to highlight an older woman and to list out all the things, all the roles that she fulfills. And this is our lovely, fantastic Lucy, who is an entrepreneur, and she has a fantastic button shop in Newtown, just down the road from where we work. And we also have Tiang. She is a stand-up comedian. She's an actor. She's very active in our Older Women's Network theatre group. She's a grandmother. And of course, as you know, we have our fabulous Beverly. These are all the words that they use to describe themselves. We will share with you the links to the campaign, and we hope that you in turn will take part and share it with your network. Most of all, we would like to invite you to take a moment every day to reflect on one thing which you value about yourself. Because when we internalize all the ageism, we actually, scientifically, it's been proven that we actually cut 7.5 years from our lifespan. We are not cougars. We are not old bags. We are stronger. We are bolder. We are wiser. And we own being older women. So thank you so much. We will share the link to the recording of this webinar. So Katherine, would you like to say a few words before we finish up?
No, just I'd encourage people, if you can, just in the chat, one word to describe yourself. The content that we're sharing with you today, it's very heavy, and we want you all to have hope. So grab a hold of a word that you would use to describe the strength that you have, to describe the power that you have. We would love you to share it in that chat before we finish, and most of all, remind yourself of the fabulous quality. Somebody's sharing creative, feisty, advocate, courageous, passionate, adventurous, determined, resilient, defiant, absolutely gorgeous. I've got goosebumps. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and happy International Women's Day, in the true solidarity of the reason why the day was created, for equality for all. Thank you. Bye-bye.